game for a minute, and everybody gets to participate. So we're going to play this game called word association. So I need you to find a partner. So you can get up and find a partner, or you can just use the partner that's next to you. But everybody needs a partner. So agree with somebody that you're going to be partners. You can have 2 partners, that's fine. Okay, so say hi, partner. All right, good. So the way word association works, we all know, is that somebody says a word, so I'll say a word, and then you think of the first thing that comes to mind, hopefully related to that term, and you tell your partner or partners what that is that came to mind. So I'll say something, and then you think of the first thing that comes to mind, and you tell your partner, and your partner tells you what that is that came to mind. Make sense?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll do a couple just to get warmed up before we get to the real game. So what do you think of, a word or words, what do you think of when you hear roller coaster?
Pizza.
No, tell your partner. Tell your partner. Okay, you ready? It's not an entire paragraph, just say the word. I mean, come on. Okay, next word, you ready? Beach.
Summer.
Alright, next word. Ready? Book. Okay, now that we're all warmed up, here we go. You ready? We're going to keep going. First word you think of when you think of Bible. Okay? It was a little quieter that time. Alright, next one, you ready? Book of the Bible. Pick one. Okay, so just out of curiosity, what kinds of things did you say? Nehemiah? How many said Genesis? Yeah, I mean that's kind of. What else did you say? John, Psalms, Exodus, Psalms, Matthew. Okay. Now last one. What do you think of when you hear Psalms? Did you tell your partner? Okay, tell your partner. Okay, so what did you say? Songs? Poetry, praise? What? Sin? Cool. What else? David? Yeah. Prayer? Heartfelt. Yeah. The Psalms, as we've been looking at during this season of Lent, we've been looking at some certain types of Psalms, and we've been looking at some of the darker Psalms, the Psalms that have to do more with sin and confession and even forgiveness, but they're part of this whole subject of what we call the penitential Psalms. These Psalms that have to do with confession and forgiveness and even some of the darker parts of life. As people have looked at the entire 150 Psalms that there are, they've actually classified them into what different types of Psalms there are in this whole collection of Psalms. And they found that there are lots of Psalms of thanksgiving, saying thank you to God for who God is. Or they've classified some as Psalms of praise. We honor you, God, we praise you, God, because of this or that. Some of them are classified as lament Psalms. I'm lamenting this horrible part of my life. I'm complaining about it. It is tough and I don't like it. Some are worship psalms that instruct people how to worship. Some they've called pilgrimage psalms, where they seem to be psalms that were recited as people walked from place to place. Some tend to be imprecatory, if you want to wow somebody with a cool word. Imprecatory psalms. That means you're asking God to pronounce a curse on somebody. So, these are the best psalms there are. God, it's just imprecatory psalms. Get out of here. So the vast majority, though, of these psalms are grouped into just 3 categories. And this comprises most of the psalms that are in the whole book. And they fall into these 3 main categories. And they are thanksgiving and trust, praise, and lament. Those are the three main categories. In fact, 85% of all the Psalms fit, generally speaking, into these three main categories. So, if we compare then how many Psalms fall into each of these categories, it's kind of interesting. What falls into these three main categories. So we find the percentages of Psalms, if we look at this graph, what percentages of the Psalms fall into these categories. So if you look, you can see about 18% fall into thanksgiving and trust, about 27-28% fall into praise, and about 40% fall into lament. So these are the most popular types or groups of Psalms. So somebody did a really interesting thing. At least I think it's interesting. Hopefully you will too in another moment. But they did an interesting study in comparison. They realized, well, wait a minute. The book of Psalms is basically like a hymnal or a worship book. Because people used the book of Psalms as a song book, as a worship book when they were gathered together in church worshiping. And so if the Psalms are a hymnal or a worship book that reflects people's worship, how does that compare with the books that we use for worship, like our hymnals and our songbooks and our collection of worship materials? So they did this great study, and what they did is some person looked at some of the three most popular hymnals or songbooks out there and categorized all the songs in those songbooks and compared them with these categories. And can you guess what they found? Watch.
Wow.
Our songbooks, some of the most popular ones, have tons in the thanksgiving and trust, about the same in the praise, and very few in the lament. Almost the total opposite, right, of how the Psalms are structured. And shouldn't our worship reflect the Bible's book of worship? I mean, interesting. So why do you think that our songbooks have the opposite comparison?
We want people to feel good.
We want people to feel good. Laments don't sell, so nobody's going to buy those hymnals. Yeah, we don't like to talk about that stuff. When we come to worship, we don't want to sing about, oh Lord, my life is awful, and let's go home. I mean, that's not the charge of church. I mean, we want to be excited and lifted up in Jesus' name, and we don't want to be drowned in our sin and awful life. So no wonder these books don't reflect this. But if the Psalms say that this is the majority of life, is this the majority of life? I mean, think about it. How much of our lives are given to complaining about things, about suffering through things, about not feeling good, about working to solve problems because there are so many problems? I mean, think about all the industries in the world and all the jobs that exist that center around solving problems in the world. Pretty much everything is centered on solving a problem. There are products that are produced. There are services that are given. There are people, industries, all centered around solving problems. It's the problems in the world that produce and take up all of our time. And if this is the majority of our time, if this is the majority of our work, if this is oftentimes what dominates so much of what we think about, then why not have that be the dominant part of our worship? See, so many of the Psalms center on this and provide some incredible wisdom and insight about how to live through the lament kinds of parts of life. Because we all have them. It's the majority of life, so why not admit it and then worship through it? Because the Psalms bring us some great ideas about how to live through and live in a relationship with God, even in the midst of this kind of life. So Psalm 102 is that kind of psalm. It's typically called a lament psalm. But my favorite part about it is it's an atypical lament psalm. It certainly has the lament part, but it also has another part that takes us somewhere else. Typically the lament psalms, if you read through, there's about 60 of them, and they're of course not fun to read, but we've been reading some of them. There's about 60 of them, and if you read through them, they typically start with, "My life is awful, Lord." And they end with, "My life is awful, Lord." And in the middle, can you guess what's in the middle? "My life is awful, Lord." And let me tell you all these vivid pictures of how my life is awful. And I mean, they just stay there, They really don't go anywhere. That's why it's not fun to read these Psalms. But Psalm 102 starts that way. And it starts with some great lament. It says this, Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to my plea. Don't turn away from me in my time of distress. Bend down and to listen and answer me quickly when I call to you. For my days disappear like smoke, and my bones burn like red-hot coals. My heart is sick, withered like grass, and I've lost my appetite. Because of my groaning, I am reduced to skin and bones. I am like an owl in the desert, like a little owl in a far-off wilderness. I lie awake, lonely as a solitary bird on the roof. My enemies haunt me day after day. They mock and curse me. I eat ashes for food. My tears run down into my drink because of your anger and wrath. For you have picked me up and thrown me out. My life passes as swiftly as the evening shadows. I am withered away like grass. Amen? Let's go home. In other words, my body hurts. I'm sick. I have no appetite. I don't want to eat. I've lost weight. I feel horrible. I'm living in fear because of how people treat me. I feel like God has abandoned me. My life is over. And on one level, it's good to know that the Psalms are with us. Because that's part of life. And sometimes that's just how we feel. But the good thing is, Psalm 102 doesn't stay there. As we saw earlier, the majority of something matters. If there's more of something, we tend to take notice of it, and it matters. The majority of Psalm 102 is not that. That's about 40% of the psalm. The other 60% is something very different. And that points us towards something that the psalmist, I think, wants to teach us about how to live through that part of life. So here's where the psalm goes. And at least for me, it's actually not where I expected the psalm to go. It says, But you, O Lord, will sit on your throne forever. Your fame will endure to every generation. You will arise and have mercy on Jerusalem. And now is the time to pity her. Now is the time you promised to help. For your people love every stone in her walls and cherish even the dust in her streets. Then the nations will tremble before the Lord. The kings of the earth will tremble before his glory. For the Lord will rebuild Jerusalem. He will appear in his glory. He will listen to the prayers of the destitute. He will not reject their pleas. And so the Lord's fame will be celebrated in Zion, his praises in Jerusalem. When multitudes gather together and kingdoms come to worship the Lord, the children of your people will live in security. Their children's children will thrive in your presence. Now, what's the writer doing? Because this isn't what I expected. I mean, think about back to the beginning. He starts off with this whole lament section. My life is over, my life is horrible, and my life is over, and it's terrible. And then immediately shifts to this, and who's he writing about? Or what is he writing about? What's he describing in this second part of the psalm? He's describing hope, but what physical thing, what place is he talking about? Jerusalem. Why is he talking about Jerusalem? I mean, if he's talking about my life is over, it's so horrible, I feel terrible, and then he starts describing Jerusalem. I mean, if I'm in pain, I'm not going to start describing Exeter. Or I'm not going to be describing some place. I mean, it doesn't match. So why is he doing it? For them in their world, Jerusalem meant something. When I was growing up, my parents encouraged us to play lots and lots of sports. I played baseball for a couple of years, and it was clearly not my niche. I played dodgeball. I played all kinds of games on the playground at school. We went to sports camps, and we learned all sorts of... We learned tennis, and we learned ping pong. We learned all kinds of different sports. I never found my niche until I played soccer. And I loved soccer. And as I played and grew up playing, I saw those players who were really good at playing forward. And I knew I was not a good forward. And then I saw those who were good at playing goalie, and I was never going to be a good goalie. I saw those playing midfield, and I thought, I can't do that either. The only position I could play was defender. But I loved being a defender. I don't know what it was about being a defender, but I just loved that defensive mode. And I knew that my job was to keep the ball out of the goal. And that's what I did. And that's what I worked at, and that's what I trained for. That was my job. And so I always played a defender. But as a defender, there was one thing you almost never got to do, which is score a goal. I might have scored, like 2 goals in my entire however many years of playing soccer, and they were total flukes. And I didn't mean to score them, I just happened to. Because I was a defender. So when somebody would ask, because most people, friends of our family or my friends knew I played soccer, and they'd ask the typical question if they knew you had a game. They'd ask, well, did you win your game? And I was happy to say either yes or no, depending on what happened. I was happy to say, well, yeah, we won our game. But I didn't score any goals. But I was part of a team that won a game. And I knew what team I was on. See, this psalm writer knows what team he's on. And he's on this team where Jerusalem is so much a part of his story. For them, Jerusalem was like this icon, this symbol for a relationship with God. And I think it's also like if they had a thermometer, Jerusalem was their thermometer. It was their gauge for if things are going well with God. And so if things are going really well with God, and people were in good with God, then the city would be thriving, and the walls would be strong, and the enemies wouldn't be conquering them. People were happy and content. But if things were not going well with God, then the thermometer would show it. And the city walls would be ruined, and they would be attacked, and people would be sick. And it was very obvious when you looked at Jerusalem whether or not things were going well for God's people. So when the psalm writer starts talking about Jerusalem, when he's in all of his panic and all of his pain, he's crying out for his story, and he's saying, this, God, is my story. And I want you to redeem and to heal and to restore this city because this is so much a part of who I am. And I'm part of this larger story that I know it's not just about me and my pain and my suffering and the stuff I'm going through. I know it's about all of your people that you call your people. And when you decide to heal, you decide to heal in a big way. And when you decide to restore, you decide to restore in a big way. And so I'm going to see that not just in me, I'm going to see that in Jerusalem. And he knew what story he was part of, so he was claiming that story. And if you even listen to the end, just the last verse in the psalm, the children of your people will live in security. Their children's children will thrive in your presence. He's not just talking about right now and woe is me in this moment. I mean, he's saying, God, you can do things that are for generations to come. And so my story is just part of this much, much bigger story. And so even in lamenting his own crisis, he's realizing that he's part of this bigger thing that God's doing. We just celebrated St. Patrick's Day yesterday. And I love St. Patrick's Day because of the story. St. Patrick wrote his story. He wrote his biography. And in his biography, he tells the story that he grew up in Britain. And when he was 16 years old, he was captured by Irish traders, and they took him back to Ireland and they enslaved him. And so he was a herdsman in Ireland for 6 years, being a slave. He finally was able to escape. And he got into a ship and he sailed back to his homeland. Through a course of tough events, he eventually made it back home. When he got back home, he eventually trained in ministry to become a leader in ministry. And during that time, at some point, he had a dream. And in his dream, somebody presented him a letter. And at the top of the letter, it said, "The voice of the Irish." And he read this letter, and as he read it, he said that he heard the voice of the Irish people calling out to him to come to their land and save them. Now, imagine you're Patrick. I was enslaved in your country for 6 years. I finally escaped, and you want me to do what? Well, of course, he didn't like the idea, but he answered the call. And he said, I will go. He says, even the night before his ship was to sail back to Ireland, he had severe doubts whether or not this is what he should be doing. But he went. And we all know the results. He took Jesus to Ireland, and it changed the course of their society. But he heard God's call, and this was the story that drove him to keep going. I'm sure there are days in Patrick's journey to Ireland and in his days in Ireland where he's thinking, what am I doing? But there was a story that gripped him, and a story that kept him going and pulled him through what he was dealing with. What's the story that pulls you through? Because we all have this kind of life, and the majority of our lives are dealing with stuff and challenge and problems and stuff we don't like. So what pulls you through? Because you've got to have a story. Everybody has to have a story. The story that we go back to and we say, I can get through. Or I've seen this before in somebody else and I know that I can get through. This isn't the end, and I've read this, and that's my story. That's the story that I hold on to. When we were initially talking about RiverCross Church, we did not have a story. And that was frustrating to me, because I wanted a story to hold on to. And so every time when we got together, every week we got together and we talked, we also read Scripture. And we read Scriptures from all over the Bible. And we talked about them. Sometimes the Scriptures generated a lot of discussion. And sometimes they didn't generate much of any discussion. When we read the beginning of Joshua, we were gripped. Because when Joshua was at the edge of the Jordan with all these people behind him and God said, cross the river, Joshua said, that's impossible. I can't cross that river. It's flooded. It's too deep. All these people can't cross. There's no way this can happen. What do you mean, cross the river? And God said, step into the river, and your people will cross. So that's the moment that we were at. We're reading the story and we're like, oh my goodness, we're Joshua. We don't know if we're supposed to start a church. We don't know how to start a church. We don't know what we're doing. This is impossible. And our question had been, do we step in? And then we see Joshua and God saying to him, just step in. So we thought, well, maybe we're supposed to step in. That became our story. Because God led them across. God led them to do the impossible. And that became the name of RiverCross Church. That became something that pulls us through. And when I get discouraged, when I wonder what's going to happen, when I wonder about the future, that's my story. I read it, I hang on to it, I tell it, I share it, I smile when I read that story, because that's my story. One of the greatest places, I think, to find our story is by reading the Bible. A story doesn't always jump out. Sure, there's times when we read it and think, that was interesting, and we move on. But there are other times when we read and we think, that's what I'm going through. You know what I mean? One of my friends has an uncanny ability, when you're talking to him, to be able to tell you a Bible story that reflects exactly what you're going through. And he never fails about being able to match them up. It's incredible. Not only that he's able to do it, but it's incredible that the Bible has the breadth of our life in it. It has all the stories that we will go through and that we ever deal with. I hope we find our stories. We find our stories in God's story, and that we can hold on to those stories to pull us through. Let's pray.